What if the most detailed map of heaven ever written survived only because a group of medieval Slavonic monks working in a monastery somewhere in Eastern Europe copied a text they found in a language they could read, but a tradition they barely understood? What if that map described not one heaven but seven, each more architecturally precise than anything in Genesis, anything in Revelation, anything in the Quran? And what if, buried in that map, were details so specific, so cosmologically radical, so theologically strange, that no other ancient text anywhere in the world preserves anything like them? That is not a hypothetical. That is the actual situation we are in. The Second Book of Enoch exists. It is real. It sits in the canon of scholarship on ancient Jewish mysticism, quietly studied by specialists, almost entirely unknown to the general public. And what it contains is unlike anything else in religious literature. Picture this. It is sometime in the 1st century, either just before the Common Era or just within it. Scholars disagree. A Jewish writer, working in a tradition that revered the figure of Enoch more deeply than almost any other, sat down and composed a journey. Not just any journey. The journey of a man named Enoch, the great-great-great-great-grandson of Adam, the 7th patriarch, the man who, in the book of Genesis, simply disappears with the explanation that God took him through 7 distinct heavens, each one a layer of reality more overwhelming than the last. In the first book of Enoch, which survived in Ethiopia and was rediscovered by the Western world in the 18th century, Enoch travels through a cosmos of angels and fallen watchers, sees the foundations of the earth and the prison of the stars that disobeyed, encounters the Son of Man seated on a throne of glory. It is vast. It is strange. It is the most important non-canonical text you've never read. But the second book of Enoch is something different. The first book is panoramic. It sweeps across cosmic history, from the fall of the Watchers to the final judgment. The second book is vertical. It goes up. Level by level, heaven by heaven, it takes you through layers of reality until you are standing at the throne of God itself. And then it tells you what happened to the man who stood there. And here is the thing that should stop you cold. This text did not survive in Ethiopia, where the first book survived. It did not survive in Hebrew or Aramaic or Greek, the languages of the ancient Jewish and Christian worlds. It survived in Slavonic. Russian and Balkan manuscripts, the earliest dating from the 14th century, copied by Orthodox Christian monks in monasteries thousands of miles and more than 1,000 years removed from wherever this text was originally composed. Why Slavonic? Why there? Why then? And what does it mean that the most comprehensive, most architecturally precise, most cosmologically radical description of heaven in all of ancient literature survived in a language that almost nobody would have associated with ancient Jewish mysticism? Today, we are going to find out. Enoch is asleep. This is how the second book of Enoch begins. Not with a thunderclap, not with a divine summons from the sky, not with the kind of dramatic opening you might expect from a text about to describe the architecture of 7 heavens. Enoch is asleep in his house. His sons, Methuselah and the others, are asleep in the next room. It is, by all appearances, a completely ordinary night. And then it isn't. 2 men appear beside him, the text is specific. These are not small, ambiguous figures. They are enormous, taller than anything Enoch has ever seen. Their faces shine like the sun. Their eyes are like burning lamps. Fire comes from their lips. Their clothing is described as like foam of the sea, which is a strange, haunting image, suggesting something that has no fixed form, that moves and shifts and cannot be grasped. They have wings, more beautiful than any bird's. They are standing at the head of his bed. Enoch wakes up, and in a detail that I find almost unbearably human, the text tells us that he was frightened and that his face changed color. This is a man encountering the genuinely supernatural, not the comfortable supernatural of popular religious imagination, where angels arrive looking like friendly strangers in linen robes, but something enormous and radiant and completely outside the categories of ordinary experience. His face changes color. He has just seen something his nervous system does not know how to process. The angels, and they are angels, though they don't identify themselves immediately, tell him to be brave. They have been sent by the Lord. He is to go with them today. And they tell him something that sounds almost logistical. Tell your sons not to look for him. He will come back in 30 days. Now, why does this domestic detail matter? Why does the text bother to tell us that Enoch's sons are sleeping in the next room? That he needs to leave them a message that there is a 30-day timeline before his return? Because the Second Book of Enoch is not just a cosmic tour, it is a farewell narrative. And it is doing something quite deliberate by grounding itself in the ordinary before launching into the extraordinary. Enoch is not a mystic in a cave or a prophet alone in the desert. He is a father. He has a house. His children are asleep. The most comprehensive journey through the heavens in ancient literature begins with a man who has to make arrangements for his family before he leaves. This is one of the ways the Second Book of Enoch differs from the first. The first book is more mythological in register. Enoch moves through cosmic geography. He encounters the Watchers and the imprisoned angels, but there is less sense of him as a domestic, vulnerable human figure. In the second book, the humanity is foregrounded. He is frightened when the angels arrive. He weeps at multiple points during the journey. When he returns to earth after his 30 days in heaven, he gathers his sons and his household and his elders, and he teaches them everything. He is a teacher saying goodbye. He knows he will not be coming back the second time, but we are getting ahead of ourselves. The journey begins. Enoch is lifted from his bed, or rather he rises, the text suggests, under his own strength, but with the angels guiding, and the ascent starts. What was Enoch? And why, of all the figures in the ancient Jewish world, was he the one chosen for this journey? The Enoch of Genesis is almost a footnote. The seventh patriarch, son of Jared, father of Methuselah, the man who lived to be the oldest person in the Bible, was Enoch's son. Enoch himself only made it to 365 years, which sounds like a long time until you put it next to Methuselah's 969. And then, with almost no explanation, Genesis says, Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. That's it. That's all Genesis gives you. A man who walked with God, and then was simply taken. For the ancient world, that lacuna, that gap, that silence was an invitation. If Enoch was taken by God, what did he see? Where did he go? What did he learn? What did he come back and teach? The Enoch literature, a cluster of texts composed over roughly 5 centuries between about 300 BCE and 200 CE, is essentially a vast collaborative attempt to answer those questions. The first book of Enoch fills in the cosmic backstory of the Watchers, the fallen angels who descended to earth and fathered the Nephilim. The third book of Enoch, much later, takes the transformation of Enoch to its logical extreme. He doesn't just visit heaven, he becomes divine, transformed into the angel Metatron, placed on a throne of his own beside the throne of God. The second book of Enoch sits in the middle of this tradition, more developed than Genesis, more human than 3 Enoch, more architecturally specific than either. And it has something the others lack: a complete layered cosmology. Not just heaven in the abstract, but 7 distinct heavens, each with a different population, a different function, a different emotional atmosphere. A map. Let's climb it. The first heaven is, by the standards of what follows, almost comprehensible. Enoch arrives and finds a vast sea, greater than any earthly sea, and elders, 200 angels governing the stars. He sees the treasuries of snow and ice, the treasuries of clouds, the storehouses of the dew. There are angels assigned to the movements of the sun, the moon, the stars, keeping watch over what we, from below, can only observe as the regular cycles of the sky. It is an administrative heaven, a functional one, a heaven of natural forces, managed by celestial bureaucrats. Already you can feel the difference from any popular conception of the afterlife. This is not a place of rest or reunion. It is a place of work. The second heaven is where things get strange. Enoch arrives and finds darkness. Not the darkness of space, the cold and vast darkness between the stars, but a different kind of darkness, a prison darkness. And in that darkness, angels, weeping. These are fallen angels, not the spectacular, magnificent fallen angels of Milton, striding through hell with Baroque fury, but something quieter and more terrible. They are imprisoned, awaiting judgment, and they are still conscious. They know what they did. They know what is coming. They can see their own condition with complete clarity, and they weep. One of the most striking details in the entire text. These angels ask Enoch to pray for them. Think about that for a moment. Enoch, a human being, the most temporary and fragile category of creature imaginable by cosmic standards, is being asked by fallen angels to intercede for them. There is an implicit theology here that is surprisingly developed. The fallen angels know they cannot petition God directly. They have burned that bridge. But a human, a righteous human, ascending through the heavens, perhaps his prayers could reach the throne. Perhaps there is mercy available that they can no longer access themselves. Enoch tells them gently that he cannot help. He is on a journey of his own. He moves on. The third heaven is, cosmologically, one of the most complex heavens in the text, because it contains both paradise and a kind of preliminary hell in close proximity. Paradise is described in extraordinary sensory detail. Gardens of extraordinary beauty, trees never seen on earth, fruits whose fragrance fills the air with sweetness beyond description. 300 shining angels tend these gardens, and at the center, the tree of life, not the vague, symbolic tree of life of Genesis, but something specific, material, with roots that reach down through all the heavens. This is where the righteous will come after the final judgment. But also in the third heaven, and this is one of the details that most rewards sustained attention, there is a place of darkness and torment reserved for those who have sinned against God. It is in the north, the text specifies, and it is described in terms that are almost deliberately claustrophobic, freezing cold and burning heat alternating, darkness, cruel angels with no mercy. The geography of this heaven holds both reward and punishment in the same cosmic level. What does it mean that paradise and preliminary hell are neighbors in the third heaven? It suggests, and this is one of the interpretive threads that runs through two Enoch scholarship, a cosmology in which moral consequences are built into the architecture of reality itself. Heaven is not simply a realm of bliss. It is a realm of order, and order requires that both justice and mercy have a place. The fourth heaven is the heaven of the sun and the moon, and it is here that one of the most unexpectedly moving details in the entire text appears. Enoch watches the movements of the sun. He sees it being carried by angels, not metaphorically but literally, a convoy of celestial beings guiding this enormous burning vehicle through its daily circuit. And the text says something that I have not been able to get out of my head since I first read it. The angels who carry the sun are described as tired, exhausted, from eternal ceaseless labor. Now, this could be translated differently in different manuscripts, and scholars debate the precise nuance. But the image is there. Angels who have been doing the same thing since the creation of the world, without rest, without relief, moving the sun through its circuit day after day since time began, and they are worn down by it. Even divine labor has a cost. Even infinite beings feel the weight of infinite work. There is something almost unbearably compassionate about this detail. It does not fit any comfortable theology. It is not the image of a heaven run by beings who exist in eternal ease. It is a heaven populated by workers, diligent, faithful, magnificent, and tired. The fourth heaven also contains the cycles of the moon, the 12 gates through which the sun passes in its annual journey, and, in some manuscripts, a complete astronomical system that aligns with the kind of precise solar calendar that the Dead Sea Scrolls community also favored. This is not incidental. The Second Book of Enoch may belong to a tradition that had very specific views about how time should be calculated, and those views are embedded in the architecture of the cosmos. The fifth heaven is where the Second Book of Enoch earns its place in the history of theology. Enoch arrives and finds the Grigori. The word Grigori comes from the Greek for watchers, the same word used in the first book of Enoch, and in Daniel for the class of angels whose descent to earth to take human wives produced the Nephilim. But these are not those watchers. These are the ones who stayed. Think about what that means. In the mythology of the Enoch tradition, a group of 200 angels made a pact on Mount Hermon. They swore together that they would descend to earth, take human women as wives, reveal forbidden knowledge to humanity. And they knew, the text makes clear, that they were choosing an irreversible course. Their leader Shemazai was afraid he would be the only one condemned, and he made the others swear an oath so they would all be equally culpable. They went down. They fathered the Nephilim. The world was filled with violence and corruption. And eventually they were imprisoned, bound, awaiting the final judgment. But there were watchers who did not go, who stayed, who kept their post and fulfilled their function and did not descend. And here, in the fifth heaven of the second book of Enoch, we find them. They are standing in silence, their faces, and this is the detail that I think is one of the most haunting images in all of ancient literature, are turned away from God. Not in defiance, not in rebellion, in grief. The text says that their voices are quiet. They are not singing. In a cosmos where the angels of every other heaven sing their praises, fill the air with hymns, and make worship the atmosphere of their existence, the Grigori are silent because they are mourning. They are mourning for their brothers, the ones who went down. There is a theology implicit in this image that is rarely made explicit in ancient religious texts. These watchers did the right thing. They stayed. They obeyed. They did not descend. And yet, they are not unaffected. They cannot be unaffected. The angels who went down were their companions, their equals, beings they had existed alongside since before the creation of the world. And those beings are now imprisoned in darkness, weeping in the second heaven, awaiting a judgment from which there is no appeal. What do you do with loyalty when the thing you were loyal to was correct and the people you loved were not? What does righteousness cost when you watch someone you cared about make a catastrophic choice and could not stop them? The Grigori are the answer. You grieve, silently, with your face turned away from the light. Enoch, moved by their silence, exhorts them. He tells them to stop mourning and to worship God. And this is the detail that seals the theological complexity of the scene, they do. They begin to praise God. They return to worship. But the text does not say that their grief is resolved. It says only that they praised. The grief and the praise coexist. They have not forgotten. They will not forget. But they can hold both. The Grigori appear nowhere else in ancient angelology with this kind of development. The first book of Enoch mentions watchers who stayed, but gives them no interiority, no emotional life, no scene. The later Kabbalistic literature is more interested in the fallen angels than the faithful ones. The Grigori of Second Enoch are unique, and their uniqueness raises a question that has never been fully answered. Where did this tradition come from? Was there a source now entirely lost that developed the mythology of the loyal watchers in the way that Second Enoch preserves? Or was the author of Second Enoch doing something genuinely original, taking the mythology of the fallen angels and imagining for the first time the perspective of those who chose differently? We don't know. And the not knowing is itself significant. It suggests that the second book of Enoch is not simply a compilation of existing traditions. It is doing creative theological work, and some of that work may be entirely its own. There is also a question about free will that the Grigori raise and do not answer. The angels who fell chose to fall. The tradition is explicit on this. They made a pact. They swore an oath. They knew what they were doing. Their agency is not in question. But the Grigori also made a choice to stay, to obey, to not descend. And their grief is the cost of that choice, not a punishment, not a consequence of wrongdoing. Simply the price of watching something terrible happen to beings you loved and being unable to stop it. If you believe in free will, then you must also believe in this, that the exercise of free will by others can cause suffering in those who did everything right. The Grigori stood in the fifth heaven and did not go down, and they still bear the weight of what their brothers did. Righteousness is not insulation. Sometimes the faithful suffer the secondary consequences of others' choices, permanently, without resolution, in silence. This is not a comfortable theology, but it is an honest one. The sixth heaven passes in a blaze of angelic administration. Orders and authorities and powers managing the movements of the cosmos, studying humanity, recording human deeds, interceding for human souls. It is a heaven of attention. Someone is paying attention to what happens below. Many someones. And then the seventh heaven. The angels who have guided Enoch through the previous six heavens stop. They will not go further. This is not a heaven for guides or escorts. This is the innermost level of reality, and a human being, even a righteous human being, in the middle of a divinely sanctioned journey, cannot simply walk in. Enoch is left briefly at the threshold. And the text tells us, with characteristic honesty, that he is terrified. He is trembling. He cannot look at the light ahead of him. He prostrates himself, hiding his face. And then the archangel Gabriel, or in some manuscripts another angel, is sent out from the throne to bring him in. The threshold is crossed. The seventh heaven contains the angelic orders in their highest form: cherubim, seraphim, the ophanim, the hosts that surround the throne. Their light is beyond description. The text makes a valiant attempt and then essentially admits defeat, reaching for superlatives and then reaching past superlatives into a kind of linguistic surrender. There are no words. There is only the impression of overwhelming magnitude, and at the center, the Lord of Spirits. The text does not attempt a physical description. It cannot. What it describes instead is the experience of presence, heat, light, an awareness that something is present that is categorically beyond everything Enoch has passed through in the previous six heavens. All of those heavens, with their frozen treasuries and their weeping prisoners and their tired celestial workers and their silent grieving watchers, were real. But this is the reality that makes them real. This is the source. Enoch falls. He cannot stand. He expects to die. And the expectation is rational. In the ancient imagination, to see God was to be annihilated. Moses could only see the back of God as he passed. Isaiah saw the throne vision and said, "I am undone." Ezekiel saw the chariot and fell on his face. But then, something happens in the second book of Enoch that happens nowhere else in quite this way. The Lord commands the archangel Verivael to bring garments and to anoint Enoch. Verivael removes Enoch's earthly garments. These are significant. They are the clothes of a mortal, the cloth of a human body moving through time, the garments of limitation and finitude. They are taken away. Then comes the anointing. The oil is described as something whose fragrance is greater than any light, sweeter than any honey, an oil that is not of any earthly substance, that transforms what it touches. Enoch is anointed. And then he is clothed in the garments of glory, the clothing of the angels, the attire of eternal beings. He looks at himself and he sees that he looks like one of the angels. He cannot distinguish himself from them. This is the transformation, and it is theologically explosive. In the first book of Enoch, Enoch is a witness. He travels He observes, he is shown things. In the third book of Enoch, the transformation is complete and permanent. Enoch becomes Metatron, a being so exalted that later rabbinic tradition would worry that someone might mistake him for a second divine power. The second book of Enoch sits precisely between these two extremes. Enoch is transformed, genuinely, bodily transformed. His appearance changed, his garments changed, his nature elevated. But he is still Enoch. He is still, somehow, the man who was asleep in his house 30 days ago with his sons in the next room. And then Veravale does something even more unexpected than the anointing. He tells Enoch to sit down. In the ancient world, in the context of the divine throne room, this is not a casual instruction. To sit in the presence of the divine is an honor that, in most traditions, no human being was given. To be seated at the throne, even near it, is to be given a status that approaches the divine. The entire tradition of Jewish mysticism, known as the Hekkalot literature, is organized around the attempt to ascend to the throne. And most of it is about the dangers of that ascent, the risk of being destroyed by the very experience of proximity. The rabbis debated whether it was even lawful to expound the chariot vision of Ezekiel publicly. Enoch is told to sit, and then he is told to write. Veravale will dictate, Enoch will transcribe. Everything he has seen in every heaven he has passed through, every secret of the cosmos, every piece of knowledge that exists at the level of divine reality and has not yet been transmitted to human beings below. And the dictation takes 30 days and 30 nights, without pause. At the end of it, Enoch has produced 360 books. What were in the 360 books? This is one of the great unresolved questions of the text. The number 360 is not accidental. It corresponds to the number of days in a solar year if you use certain ancient calendar systems. It echoes the 365 years of Enoch's earthly life. It suggests completeness, a full cycle, a cosmically finished body of knowledge. The text gives us hints about the categories. Enoch writes about the creation of the world, about the nature of the angels, about the movements of the heavenly bodies, about the fate of human souls, about the secrets of paradise and the nature of hell, about the names of the stars, the dimensions of the earth, the properties of time. This is the book of nature, the book of angels, the book of souls, the book of judgment, all at once, all together, produced in 30 days by a human hand, anointed with divine oil, and clothed in the garments of heaven. None of these 360 books survive. What we have is the second book of Enoch itself, a description of the journey that produced them. The books were taken back to heaven, or they were lost, or they were never intended to be read on earth at all. The text does not say. But there is a tradition running through the Hermetic literature, through certain strands of Kabbalistic thought, through the medieval alchemical literature, of a body of primordial knowledge dictated at the throne of God, transmitted to humanity through an intermediary, and then lost or hidden. Whether that tradition draws on Second Enoch, or whether both draw from a common source that neither fully preserves, is a question that scholarship has not resolved. What the 360 books represent, symbolically, may be more important than any specific content. They represent the idea that heaven is not just a place, but a library, that the cosmos is, at its deepest level, a body of knowledge, and that a human being, transformed and anointed and seated in glory, could comprehend it and write it down. The universe can be described. It has been described. The description was taken back to where it came from. Whether it will ever return to us is another matter entirely. Enoch comes back. He arrives in his house or near it, and the text says that his sons come to him and his household and his elders. And they look at him. They look at his face. And something is different. He still looks like Enoch. They recognize him. But his face is changed in some way the text struggles to articulate. There is a quality to it now that was not there before. Light, perhaps. Or simply the look of someone who has been somewhere the rest of us have not. He tells them, I have 30 days. After 30 days, I will be taken again, and I will not come back. Everything I tell you in these 30 days, you must remember. You must write it down. You must teach your children, and they must teach theirs. This is the farewell transmission, one of the deepest and most recurring archetypes in human experience. The teacher who knows they are leaving, the limited time, the urgency of compression. What is most essential? What cannot be left out? If you had 30 days to transmit everything you knew to the people who came after you, what would you say first? Enoch's teachings cover a remarkable range. He speaks about the creation of the world, the 6 days of Genesis, but with added detail and specificity, a cosmological backstory that Genesis does not provide. He speaks about the fall of Satanael, the name used in Second Enoch for the adversary, the angel who turned from God in pride and was cast down before the creation of the earth. He speaks about the nature of the soul, about the judgment after death, about what awaits the righteous and what awaits the wicked. And he speaks about ethics. In extended passages that have sometimes been compared to wisdom literature like Proverbs or Sirach, Enoch gives his sons a moral curriculum. Do not harm the poor. Do not lie. Do not shed blood. Honor the Lord in your actions, not just your words. When someone comes to you asking for bread, give them bread. When someone comes to you asking for shelter, give them shelter. The measure you give is the measure that will be given back to you. In every heaven, in every accounting, without exception. There is a specificity to these teachings that is often overlooked in discussions of Second Enoch that focus on the cosmic architecture. But the cosmic architecture is not the point of the text, or rather it is not the only point. The journey through the 7 heavens is the credential. It establishes that Enoch has seen what is real, that he has been transformed by proximity to the ultimate source, and therefore his moral teachings have the weight of direct knowledge behind them. He is not teaching ethics because it is socially useful. He is teaching ethics because he has seen the mechanism of the cosmos. And the mechanism is built on the principle that how you treat the vulnerable has direct consequences in the structure of reality. This is one of the places where Enoch's influence on later religious thought, specifically, perhaps, on early Christian ethics, is most plausibly traced, though the relationship is debated. The Golden Rule, the emphasis on feeding the poor and sheltering the homeless, the idea that every good deed is recorded and every evil deed is remembered. These are not unique to Second Enoch, but Second Enoch expresses them with a cosmological grounding that makes them feel less like social convention and more like laws of nature. The 30 days end, the angels come back. The same too, perhaps. The ones who appeared at his bed at the beginning. The text does not give us a long goodbye scene. Enoch is taken. His sons are left standing with everything they have been taught and the task of transmitting it to a world that will not understand most of it. Methuselah, his son, becomes the next keeper of the tradition. He will outlive his father by centuries. He will teach Shem, Enoch's grandson, who will outlive him. And the tradition will wind its way through whatever transmission history brought it eventually to a Slavonic manuscript, to a monk's scriptorium, to a shelf in an Eastern European monastery, where it waited for the 19th century and the Western scholars who would eventually find it. Here is what we know, and here is what we can only guess. The Second Book of Enoch was almost certainly composed in a Jewish milieu, probably in the 1st century, either in the late Second Temple period, before the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE, or shortly after. There are debates about whether it has Christian interpolations. Certain passages seem to fit a Christian cosmological framework more naturally than a Jewish one. But the dominant view in recent scholarship is that the core of the text is Jewish, with some later Christian additions. If the text was composed in a Jewish milieu in the 1st century, it was almost certainly written in Hebrew or Aramaic. If it reached the Slavonic world, which it did, we have the manuscripts, it almost certainly traveled through a Greek intermediary. Greek was the lingua franca of the Eastern Mediterranean world, the language into which Jewish texts were routinely translated for use in diaspora communities. The first book of Enoch traveled from Aramaic, and possibly Hebrew, through Greek before being translated into Ethiopic. The second book of Enoch likely traveled from its Semitic original through Greek before being translated into Slavonic for use in the Orthodox Christian communities of Eastern Europe. But the Greek intermediary is gone entirely. Not a single fragment survives. This is not unusual in the history of ancient texts. Greek intermediaries were often discarded once a vernacular translation was made, or they simply did not survive the destruction of whatever library or community preserved them. But it means that we cannot reconstruct the history of the text with the kind of confidence we can reconstruct, say, the transmission of the Septuagint or the Greek versions of Sirach. We are working entirely from the Slavonic endpoint. And the Slavonic endpoint is itself divided. There are two major recensions, a longer version and a shorter version, that differ in ways that go beyond scribal error or omission. The longer version has more detailed descriptions of the heavens, more extended ethical teachings, different cosmological details. The shorter version is more compressed, but in some respects seems to preserve older material. This is one of the persistent debates in Second Enoch scholarship. Which recension is more original? Francis Anderson, whose 1983 critical edition in the Anchor Bible series remains the standard reference, argued that neither recension is simply better. They represent two different streams of transmission, each preserving material the other lacks, each reflecting a different tradition of copying and interpretation. The text was alive. It was being read, used, modified, expanded, compressed, adapted. Medieval Slavonic scribes were not simply copying a dead document. They were engaging with a living tradition. The monks who copied these texts may not have fully understood what they held. This is one of the most haunting aspects of the survival story. The Orthodox Christian monks of Eastern Europe who preserved Second Enoch were working in a tradition that valued ancient texts, but filtered them through a Christian theological lens. They almost certainly understood the text as a Christian document, or at least as a document compatible with Christian theology. The Enoch who ascends through the seven heavens and is transformed at the throne of God fit naturally enough into a Christian mystical framework, especially given the rich tradition of Byzantine mysticism and the hesychast movement that emphasized direct encounter with divine light. What they may not have understood was the Jewish milieu from which the text emerged, the specific debates about the solar calendar, the particular angelological traditions, the resonances with the Dead Sea Scrolls community, and the Hecalot mystical literature. They copied the text because it was holy, because it was ancient, because it described heaven. The precision of the cosmological and theological context they may have understood imperfectly, and yet they preserved it. And because they preserved it, because some monk in some monastery in the 14th century set his pen to parchment and copied out the story of a man ascending through seven heavens, we have it today. The first Western scholar to work seriously with the Slavonic Enoch manuscripts was R.H. Charles, the great editor of the Pseudepigrapha, who published an English translation in 1896. He recognized immediately that he was dealing with something extraordinary, a text that filled in cosmological details that no other ancient source preserved, that had direct relevance to the background of the New Testament, that offered a window into the Jewish mystical traditions of the first century. Since then, the text has been studied, debated, analyzed, and still, even now, more than a century after its rediscovery, it remains at the margins of public knowledge. It is not in the Bible. It is not in the standard Protestant Apocrypha. It is in the scholarly editions, on the library shelves, in the footnotes of books about Second Temple Judaism, and the background of the New Testament. Why? Is it suppressed? Is it forgotten? Is it simply too strange, too detailed, too cosmologically radical to fit into the categories that popular religious culture has inherited? Perhaps all three. But perhaps the more interesting question is, what would it mean to take it seriously? There is a tradition in Jewish mysticism, developed most fully in the Hecalot literature and then in Kabbalah, of treating the ascent through the heavens as an interior journey. The seven heavens are not necessarily seven physical locations stacked above the earth. They are seven layers of reality that are also seven layers of the self. The practitioner who ascends through them is not moving through space but through depth, going deeper into the structure of consciousness, past the surface level of ordinary perception, through increasingly refined and stripped down layers of awareness, until they reach the innermost chamber where the basic facts of existence are apprehended directly. In this reading, each heaven of Second Enoch corresponds to a level of awareness that most of us never reach. The first heaven, the administrative heaven, the heaven of natural cycles, is ordinary consciousness. The world as we experience it in everyday life, governed by regularities we can observe but whose deeper nature we do not access. The second heaven, the prison of the weeping fallen angels, is the level of consciousness where we encounter inherited guilt, the grief that is not our own fault, but that we carry anyway. The ways in which the choices of previous generations, our families, our cultures, our species, constrain and wound us before we have done anything at all. The weeping angels are not abstract. They are the tears we cry for things we didn't do, the weight we carry for history we didn't make. The third heaven, holding both paradise and hell, is the level at which we recognize that we carry both potentials simultaneously. The human being who reaches this level of self-knowledge understands that they are capable of extraordinary goodness and extraordinary cruelty, that both are genuinely present, and that the question is, which one is cultivated? The fourth heaven, the heaven of the tired angels, is the level at which we recognize that even the most fundamental activities of existence have a cost, not a punishment, not a failure, simply the reality that sustained effort, even divine effort, leaves a mark. The exhausted angels of the sun are the recognition that there is no free labor anywhere in the cosmos, that everything that moves at a cost. The fifth heaven, the Grigori in their silence, is perhaps the most psychologically precise image in the entire text. It is the level at which we recognize the price of having chosen differently from those we loved, not the grief of the fallen, which is visible, audible, in the second heaven. The grief of the faithful, which is silent, turned away, held in the body like a stone. The sixth and seventh heavens are beyond the reach of ordinary language, which is perhaps why the text reaches for description and then admits defeat. The innermost levels of reality are not communicable in the terms we use for ordinary experience. The 360 books are also, in this reading, a psychological image. They are the idea that at the deepest level of the self, the level accessed through the kind of transformation the text describes, everything is comprehensible. Not just the good parts, not just the parts that flatter us. Everything. The full architecture of what you are and what the world is, written down in full, without omission. Most of us live our whole lives at the level of the first heaven at best. We manage the cycles. We keep the lights on. We do not go further, because going further means encountering the weeping and the grief and the silence and the tiredness and the recognition of both potential and limitation. And all of that is uncomfortable in ways that our ordinary consciousness prefers to avoid. The Second Book of Enoch is, among other things, a document about the cost of going all the way. The farewell transmission is the archetype that resonates most personally. 30 days. Enoch has 30 days to teach his sons everything. Everything he has seen, everything he knows, everything that needs to be preserved. This is, in essence, the situation of anyone who knows they are leaving. The teacher who is terminally ill and has a semester left. The parent who has a month to finish what they started. The mentor who can see the end of their time and has to decide what is most essential, what cannot be left out, what is the distillation. The image is not only about departure through death. It is about any situation in which a body of knowledge is at risk, where the person who holds it knows that the window is closing. What do you do with 30 days? What do you say first? What do you leave out? Enoch says, do not harm the poor, do not lie, feed the hungry, shelter the homeless. The measure you give is the measure you receive. This is what survives the ascent through 7 heavens. This is what the anointed scribe of heaven's secrets considers most essential to transmit in the time he has. Not the cosmological details, not the names of the angels, not the dimensions of paradise or the geography of hell. The ethics, the practical embodied ethics of how you treat the people in front of you. This is either deeply consoling or deeply challenging, depending on where you are in life. It suggests that all of the cosmic architecture, the 7 heavens, the 360 books, the throne of glory, the garments of light, is in some sense the backdrop against which the central question plays out. How do you treat the poor man at your door? There is a question that runs under everything we have covered today, a question that I want to leave with you, because I do not think it has a clean answer. Was the survival of the Second Book of Enoch an accident? In one sense, obviously, yes. It survived because a chain of people, translators, copyists, monks, scholars, librarians, each made a choice to preserve it rather than discard it. Any one of those choices could have gone the other way. The Greek intermediary is gone. The Semitic original is gone. The Slavonic manuscripts that survived are a handful out of however many were made. The text could easily have been lost entirely. But consider what was preserved. A text that contains the most architecturally detailed description of heaven in ancient literature. A text that preserves the Grigori, a theological idea so developed and so humanly complex that no other text quite captures it. A text that records the transformation of a human being into a divine scribe, clothed in glory and seated at the throne of everything, given 30 days to write the cosmos. A text that says, at the end of all that what matters most is how you treat the person asking for bread. This text was preserved at the far end of the ancient world from where it was composed. It was preserved in a language its original authors almost certainly did not speak. It was preserved by people who probably did not fully understand the tradition that produced it. And it was preserved in 2 versions, different enough to make reconstruction difficult, similar enough to confirm that they share an original source. Everything about this survival is improbable, and yet here we are, reading it, thinking about the weeping angels and the tired guardians of the sun, and the silent grieving watchers in the 5th heaven, and the man anointed and seated and handed a pen, and told to write everything in 30 days. Was it lost by accident? Was it preserved by accident? Or is there something in the content of this text that carries its own survival instinct, something so honest, so specific, so cosmologically and humanly true, that it keeps finding readers across centuries and languages and traditions, keeps getting copied, keeps getting rediscovered, because it says something that nothing else quite says? I don't know. But I think it's worth sitting with the question. The most complete map of heaven in ancient literature was composed sometime in the 1st century, possibly in Alexandria, possibly in Jerusalem, possibly somewhere else entirely. It traveled, by some route we cannot reconstruct, into Greek. It traveled, by another route we cannot reconstruct, into Slavonic. It was copied by medieval monks who valued it enough to preserve it. It was found in the 19th century and translated and studied and debated. And now you know about it. What you do with that knowledge is up to you. You have 30 days.